welcome to another episode of the Dreamr Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Adams, and I'm very excited about our guest today. We have with us Dr. Margaret Rutherford. Hello, Margaret. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. It's like I said, it's Friday.
It's Friday.
It is Friday.
Good.
Feeling good.
I'm excited to talk to you. Just a little bit of background. Let me give you an intro. In her book, Dr. Margaret bolsters her own clinical experience with real-life stories of those experiencing perfectly hidden depression, as well as the most recent research on the dangers of perfectionism. She's passionate about the message that although depression can be heavily masked by perfectionism, its damage can be devastating to someone who may or may not be aware of the loneliness and despair that's growing more potent underneath their accomplishments. And that is extremely interesting to me.
Sure.
So welcome to the podcast, Margaret. Myself, the Dreamr community is excited that you're here. Let's get right into it.
That sounds great to me, Chris. I'm
awesome.
Delighted to be here as well.
Awesome. So talk to me. The concept perfectly hidden depression. And your book that relates to it. I want to know more. I want to understand. I feel like this is maybe something I've experienced in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So what led you to this? What is perfectly hidden depression? Let's talk.
Sure. I'll be happy to share the story with you because I never intended to write a book. I didn't want to write a book. I didn't have any ideas about writing a book. I was just doing my therapy thing and I was really happy with that. That was my second career. I was a jingle singer first and then a clinical a jingle singer. And that was quite a transition from jingle singer to clinical psychologist. It took me about 9 years, but it was great. So, and then when my son left for school, I decided I would extend the walls of my practice because I was so tired of the misunderstanding and lack of education about what therapy really is. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to help people. So that's when I started blogging. And then in 2014, I started a podcast, which is the SelfWork podcast, which awesome. It's gone great guns. So, but in April of 2014, I was just literally sitting in my sunroom one day and thinking, okay, I've got to write a weekly blog post and what do I want to do it on? And I started thinking about these people that I'd helped over the years that when they walked in my door, the last thing they would have told me was that they were either perfectionist or depressed. That they just would deny depression. In fact, say, oh, I have so many blessings, I can't be depressed. But what I noticed about all of them, Chris, was that there was either a reticence or almost an inability to connect and describe they could describe painful emotion. They could not connect with it. They couldn't express it. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote about those people and I just pulled the term perfectly hidden depression out of the book because what I learned in working with them is that they were actually dealing with a lot of loneliness, a lot of despair, shame, just constant inner voices of shame and fear. So their perfectionism was fueled by that shame. They had to prove it wrong. They had to quiet it. It wasn't fueled by a sense of fulfillment. So I wrote this post called "The Perfectly Hidden Depressed Person. Are You One?" Now at the time, I was really lucky if I got 50 likes or 20 shares or something like that. I was ecstatic. Mm-hmm. And this thing went viral.
Okay.
And at the time, I was writing for HuffPost as well, and they published it. And I had forgotten that I had left my email on the bottom of the post. And I got hundreds of emails in a 24-hour period of time. It's like you're in my head. I've never heard of this. How do you know about this? And I got curious. Mm-hmm. So I went looking for what was in the popular literature about perfectionism and depression. And of course, I found Dr. Brene Brown's work, who is incredible. She talks a lot about vulnerability and perfectionism and shame. And she mentions depression, but she didn't talk about perfectionism as being, she called it about leading to depression, but that it could actually mask depression. Mm-hmm. And that as a person in the mental health field, what I became acutely aware of was that we are missing this kind of presentation of depression because it's so easy to overlook. because the person is smiling in front of you, they're engaged in their community, they will tell you they love their life, they don't really know why they're sitting in front of you. So it can look sort of like anxiety or like even some OCD symptoms, that kind of thing. So these folks are getting misdiagnosed. So I spent the next 4 years, 4 years researching. And I found a lot in the academic research about perfectionism and suicidality, actually. And so I decided, if there's not a book out there, that maybe I should write it. And that's what I started to do. That's what I did over 4 years with a lot of help from people who volunteered to be interviewed by me. I did over 60 interviews with everyone from a brain surgeon to there was a motivational speaker, there was an advertising exec, there was a graduate student. All these people had sort of written in and said, "This is my story. Would you like to talk to me?" And I said, "Yes." Didn't take everybody. So with what I learned from them, with what I learned from the research and what I had gleaned from my own, gosh, by that time I'd been in practice for 25 years. I put this book together, and I was lucky enough to find a publisher, and it was published in November of 2019, and then of course the pandemic hit. But it's done well. I mean, I think I've sold about, oh, it doesn't matter. You know what? That doesn't matter. It's reaching people. It's reaching people
Good.
because
Yeah.
because I keep getting messages. I just got 2 today from people who said, "I can't, you don't know what this means to me to actually understand what's going on and have a label for it."
Mm. That is so interesting. It seems almost like it's hidden by like it's like depression of the achiever. It's like the person like that they're, they're active, they're doing stuff, they're working hard, they're not, uh and so yeah, I can see why people I don't know. This is weird. I'm just gonna be vulnerable for a second, but
Sure,
like I
sure.
feel like I relate to this.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, there's no term for it. Eventually, I kind of realized it was depression, but just kind of on my like entrepreneurial journey, the first few years of it were pretty rocky, right? Like
Oh, I'm
not
sure.
not necessarily successful. Starting my family around the same time. There's all the money pressures and like this pressure to like win,
Yeah.
and it's like when you take some losses, it can become more like you said, instead of purpose driven, it was like guilt driven, and like just like guilt driven is the best word I have for it, but just like, hey, like I put myself in this position, like it's all on me, these type of things. And
Yeah.
then once I kind of realized that it was guilt, and that I was like being way, way too hard on myself all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, look, I'm really on this journey to be fulfilled, to have fun, and like do what I want to do. And like that kind of simple switch one day, or over the process of a couple of weeks, really like kind of helped me shed that. And ever since, my experience has been completely different. We've got a lot of things going now, and we're talking like the same project. This is
Yes. Just
so
your attitude toward it, you're more interested in process than where exactly
then result.
than
Yeah.
result. Yeah. And that's a
Right.
huge difference. People will say, "Well, what's so wrong with perfectionism?" I mean, I like being a perfectionist, and there's nothing wrong with constructive perfectionism or adaptive perfectionism, as it's sometimes called, because
Mm-hmm.
it is about the process of learning, the process of trying, the and there's a lot of fulfillment in it. When you do well, you can take pleasure in it. You can think, "Well, wow, this is great." Then you can take a little breather because you've accomplished what you set out to do. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem is that for some people, it either never had that sense of fulfillment, because what happens with and there's not one thing that leads to a syndrome of perfectly hidden depression. There are a lot of things that can happen in childhood. You can be abused, you can be neglected, you can be the star of your family and only really given any kind of attention when you were the number one this or the number one that, and maybe a parent counted on you to do that, or you were very enmeshed with that parent. It could simply be because you grew up in a family that didn't allow you to talk about being angry or being scared or being
Mm.
depressed or sad. It can have some cultural and familial kind of reasons, because there's some cultures that don't, that think if you say you're depressed, that you're being weak and you're frail, and you don't talk about that kind of thing. So there can be all
Right.
kinds, or sometimes just in certain parts of the country, if you grew up male, that men don't do that kind of thing. So I think that what happens is you develop a strategy as a child to survive emotionally, wherever you were, whatever kind of family you were in, whatever kind of culture you were in, and you learned how to survive that. And for example, let's say someone grew up without a real nurturing parent. Well, guess
Mm-hmm.
what? Guess what their strategy becomes? I don't need a nurturing parent. I don't need to be nurtured, because that helps them survive. If they don't think they need to be nurtured, then they do fine. But the problem is, then when they get into adulthood and they walk into their adulthood saying, I don't need to be nurtured, it can lead to things like this syndrome. And then I must succeed, and I must this, and I must that. So destructive perfectionism has no fulfillment. In fact, once you accomplish one task, it's on to the next, and on to the
Mm-hmm.
next, and on to the next. And actually, there's this thing called socially prescribed perfectionism that's about this pressure to constantly meet the expectation or even exceed the expectations of other people. And it has
Mm-hmm.
been highly correlated with suicidal thoughts and even suicide. So perfectionism can be really, really dangerous.
Yeah, it's pressure, right? It's crazy amount of pressure.
Yeah.
Wow, this is so interesting. Um, so let's talk self work for a second,
Okay.
because yeah, otherwise that's otherwise that whole thing is a rabbit hole for me personally.
Mhm.
But so let's talk self work. I think self work is maybe the thing that definitely helped me come out of what I would call like my spout with depression, at least at that pivotal point in my life. The It's something I believe in a lot. I think self work is really, it's like the work. Everything kind of stems from that. Talk to me about self work. What's what's the subject of the self work podcast? What's your definition of self work, and what do you think that role in our lives, like how does that
Sure. Well, I'm a therapist, Chris, because I got really good therapy. I mean, my 20s were chaotic. I
Mm-hmm.
was not making good choices. I was lost. I'm sure anybody who knew me then hears that I've written a book about psychology, or I'm a clinical psychologist, would go, her? She was one messed up girl. Um, but so I have been doing my own self work for a long time, and I think that going either working on yourself by reading or journaling or mindfulness and meditation, or however you want to do the work, but at least to have some objective stance towards yourself is very, very important if you can. And of course, I'm a huge believer in therapy. So I start, like I said a few minutes ago, I started the podcast because I was just sick and tired of stigma. I mean, it's just, and I thought, well, what can I do about it? I can either sit here and hate it, or I can try to do something about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's when I started the podcast. The podcast is actually mostly it's me picking a subject, and then I research that subject, and I bring that research to the audience, and then I add my own 2 cents into it, as having I've had a lot of experience at this point. And then we also have a listener email. Listeners write in or email me, and I'll answer their question. The podcast is not meant to be therapy. It's not therapy, but it is therapeutic, I think. So, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
the best compliment I can get, because my welcome is always, I welcome people who are already well educated about psychology and emotional work, and those of you who might just have been diagnosed and you're looking for answers, but also to those of you who've told other people, I'd never darken the door of a therapist. But you're curious.
Right.
And so it's when those people write in and say, I'm one of those never darken the door people. And by listening to you, I figured out, therapists are not weird. Not all of them, at least. They're not completely all about, warm and fuzzy. They just, you're just a real person and you've got this experience. So that always makes me feel good. So that's mostly the format of the podcast. Last year I reached over 2 million downloads, and then now I'm ginning along at about 100,000 per month. That's just downloads. That's just downloads. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then last summer, I was approached by some people. I had tried doing interviews early on, and I don't know, my listeners didn't like it, so I quit. But some people began reaching out to me that were New York Times bestselling authors. I couldn't say no. I was so fascinated. I wanted to talk to them, and learn from them. And I thought my listeners could learn from them. So about now, once every 4 to 5 weeks, I'll also do an interview. Like I just finished with Jenny Lawson, who has written many books and hundreds of thousands of people read her books. And she was a delight. I've worked with John Moe and Terry Chaney and Lewis Howes and all that kind of thing. So it's been great.
That's amazing. I'm definitely looking forward to checking out the podcast.
Sure, I hope you do.
I really will. I promise, because this whole subject matter is obviously very interesting to me and relatable. So,
well, I do talk about perfectly hidden depression. There are probably, I don't know, 12 to 15 episodes, but I'm at episode 227. So, and I don't talk about like really jargonistic things like this last one this week was on stuffing your emotions. I've written ones on how to build your self-confidence, making motivation happen. I try to talk about the things that people really talk to me about in therapy, and that I have some ideas about it myself. And then, like I said, I go look up the best research.
Yeah, that's self-work.
That's self-work. That's right.
That's what I'm really interested in. I think self-work is very critical when it comes to pursuing your dreams. Just because, I believe in a concept just of like building momentum on things. Even just like the story of how your book got published,
Right.
a series of blog posts, might have been your 100th blog post, I don't know, but that habit of expressing those ideas led to you writing that blog post, it going viral, and all this, right?
The other thing were relationships. I mean, I'm kind of an introvert, so I wasn't too good at the relationship building part, but the people that I did meet, and sure enough, one of them turned out to be an acquisitions editor for an agent. Which I didn't even know. She probably told me what she did when I first met her, but I didn't even understand the language well enough to know.
Right.
So a lot of times, I've been very blessed and very lucky that a lot of the people who have known me and have helped me, and now I'm trying to do the same thing for other people. So, but y'all had asked me some questions. You said these are the kinds of things that we want to talk about. And one of the things was, what were your pivotal moments? And I began thinking about pivotal moments. There were several of them I can remember, but for me, they were really not only when I moved forward on something, but when I changed direction. As a therapist, I think it's not the direction you go in that really matters. It's that you go in a direction. Everybody says, oh, I've got to do the right thing. The next step has to be the right step. Well, yes, it's wonderful if it is, and it makes it easier on everybody. But so many people deal with, they have a dream, they have something that they really are inspired about or passionate about. They have a talent, they have a skill. But I've got to do this in the right way. I've got to make sure that this first step, and that's paralyzing. It's absolutely paralyzing. And so I think that, a little mantra of mine is, again, I'll say it again, it's not the direction that you go, it's that you go in a direction. And then going down that path, will help you. You'll learn. It's kind of like if you were literally, if you were hiking a trail you'd never walked, and someone said, well, how far are you going to go? Well, I don't know. I'm going to walk for 30 minutes and see how tired I am. And I may come back, or I may decide, I need to do this trail again, or I may decide I'll never do this trail again. So, the act of moving is what teaches you where you want to go next. When I first was a jingle singer, I'd heard about this thing called music therapy, and I had been volunteering at the Battered Women's Shelter in Dallas. And I thought, oh no, and I wasn't real happy. Again, that whole chaotic thing, being a jingle singer, and I sang in clubs at night, and it just wasn't. I was not flourishing as a person. And so I went into music therapy. I put all the money I had in the world down that first year to get me through that first year. And then I became a graduate assistant so I could make a little money. And, that's not what I ended doing. I went, my last internship was in a psych hospital, and I thought, oh, no, this is what I want to do. Well, didn't even have a psychology degree. So I had to find some more money, and I had to go back to school for a whole nother year, get more hours. And again, so literally it took me 9 years to go from closing the Fairmont Hotel as a singer to seeing my first patient. And it was a long 9 years, but it was so rewarding along the way.
That's incredible. That's incredible. This is something I actually talk about a lot and really believe in, is just the idea of movement, just one foot in front of the other. And, that's why I believe in self-work, because it gets some movement going in a way that benefits you personally. And then, then it kind of spills to the outside of like, okay, now I can really, know I'm taking effective steps as I take these steps forward. And movement. And second is just like kind of just pointing in a direction is like kind of the piece that I think about when it comes to that is like, we don't need to know what the next step is. It doesn't really matter, right? As long as we're taking that step. But if we have,
it's hard to trust that, but that's certainly what I have found is true.
Yeah. But if you have an end goal, right, then it doesn't matter. Like as long as you're moving forward, you're moving towards it. And that moving forward is what creates those potentials, the possibilities, the relationships. You go to that event, you call that person, whatever the next step is.
Sure.
That's when the doors open. So that's huge. Thank you for sharing that. And
you're welcome. It's hard earned.
Benefit everyone.
It's so hard to trust that. It's just really, it's hard. Well, what do you mean? I that I might waste money and I don't have hardly any money, or I might waste my time, or and I think that whole mindset of this will be a waste, rather than saying, I don't think we tell our children that. I don't think you say, well, if you try this sport, or you try the guitar, or you try, this friendship, and if it doesn't work out, you don't go, well, that was a waste of your life, you 4-year-old, or 7-year-old or 8-year-old. You go, well, okay, so what did you learn? And you learn something about yourself, and then you just incorporate that into who you are. But somehow I guess because there's so much pressure in our culture to be successful, that we box ourselves in a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what creates the paralyzation, right? Is you want to be there. It's about the result. Again, like you're talking about being process oriented versus being result oriented. It's like, I only want to spend the money on this guitar class if it means I'm going to be a successful guitar player afterwards.
Right.
I only want to spend the money on this course if it means I'm going to go make the $100,000 afterwards. And it's not about that, and that's why I really, that's why I just believe in the concept of dreams as a way to really help kind of navigate these things. It's just because it's just it's taking the next step. You take the class because that's in alignment with, you wanting to, whatever your dream is. And then you'll learn something, and then it's on to the next thing. And it's, if we could, shift that mindset, I think that would help solve so much. And so how do you think that plays into Does that play into the concept of hidden depression and that kind of like, perfectionism thing?
Oh, yes, of course. I've had some African American patients of mine who came because of the perfectly hidden depression thing say, but Margaret, you don't understand. If I had been perfect, if I had looked perfect, or, I would have gotten passed over. And so there was an extra motivation for, and I think this is true for a lot of minorities, that you fear being passed over or not ever getting the opportunity if you
Mm-hmm.
don't if you don't exceed the expectations of everybody. So I think that is obviously something that has to be worked through. But as my patients have been doing that, they're finding that their voices are stronger. They're not trying to fit the mold of the workplace where they are. They're able to come more into their own voices and say, I'm not going to look like the person next to me because my experience is so much different. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
this last year with all that's been going on, both pandemic and culturally and racially or ethnically, I guess I should say, it's been especially important. Those conversations have been very, very phew, difficult, very
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. So what's the way out? Say someone listens to this or they read your book and they realize, wow, like I'm actually depressed. I would thought it was something else. I thought I just needed to get this and this done. What's that first step to?
Well, it's people have sort of asked me the question again. Perfectly hidden depression is not a diagnosis. You don't go into your primary care office and say doctor's office and say, I have perfectly hidden depression. Can I take a
Well,
pill
it's
for that?
depression, right? Like that's what
It is
we're.
it is not going to fit criteria for classic depression the way it looks upon presentation.
Okay.
Okay. I had a
Mm-hmm.
guy tell me, for example, he went to a psychiatrist and psychiatrist gave him a depression inventory, which a lot. And so, do you ever feel helpless? Do you ever feel hopeless? Do you ever think about suicide? No, 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 is what someone with perfectly
Mm-hmm.
hidden depression would say. And he actually tried to hang himself about 3 weeks later. And because the psychiatrist just dismissed him and said, no, you're not depressed. So the psychiatrist actually came, which is incredible in and of itself, came to his hospital room and almost mad. And he said, you were in my office 3 weeks ago and you didn't say but anything. And the man looked at him and said, you asked me the wrong questions. You
Mm-hmm.
asked me, do I feel hopeless? I'm not going to tell you because I'm a perfectionist that I feel hopeless. The question you should ask me is, if you did feel hopeless, would you tell anyone? And the answer to
Mm-hmm.
that question is no, I wouldn't. And that's the clue that we've got somebody
Mm-hmm.
who cannot express painful emotions, probably because of trauma, probably because of culture, a whole bunch of different reasons. So, part of the work of this, you say, how do you get better? You really have to be, first step is to become conscious of it as a problem.
Right.
Most people, would say, I'm glad I'm a perfectionist and I think she's crazy and I don't want to give it up. Well, that's fine. And maybe you have constructive perfectionism. But if you can see it as a problem, you have to kind of become mindful and be aware of the constant negative talk you've got in your head going on, and how
Mm-hmm.
you're always overly responsible, and you worry, but you don't let anybody know you worry. So all you do is you just have to have a lot of control. Or you're a really, really good friend, but nobody knows who you are. No one knows you. You'll say things like, oh, if I started crying, I'd never stop. Ha 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 ha.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you cover up with laughter, you cover up with sarcasm, you cover up with changing the subject, you cover up with just refusing to talk about it. And yet you can be a very empathic, giving, caring person yourself. You just have walls up that letting
Right.
anyone else into your world. Some of the steps that I said in the book, I think it's looking at some of your tendencies up toward commitment. You'll probably try too hard and get burnout really quickly. I mean, there's certain things about perfectionism that are specifically difficult in therapy. But also, I think you have to look at your rules and beliefs and really
Mm-hmm.
challenge some of those, all the musts and have tos and never cans and all that kind of stuff. Then you have to, with compassion, go back and look at your childhood and begin to acknowledge, not blame, acknowledge the things that happened that were both wonderful and were helpful and were caring and good, but also the things that really were painful. And as you go back and acknowledge those things and are compassionate toward that child, then you can also begin to see these patterns.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I had this happen to me when I was 4, I probably would have acted differently here, or I would have acted differently there. So you go back and you kind of trace a timeline. If you have severe trauma in your background, you should not do that work by yourself. You need
Mm-hmm.
a trained therapist to really help you with that.
Right.
Then I'll tell you that, I mean, my patients hear me say this and they, some of them roll their eyes because I say it so much. But I think insight is wonderful. Understanding something objectively or analytically and even conceptually is very helpful. You can have lots of aha moments. But where you get hope is from behavior change.
Mm-hmm.
You get hope from seeing yourself feel an emotion you've never felt. You see yourself make a choice you've never made, or don't make the choice you typically make.
Right.
You begin to see yourself moving, and here we're back to movement, aren't we? Moving and changing and growing. And you can take all the different traits of perfectly hidden depression and begin, and others that I'm sure those are not the only 10 traits of perfectionism. They were just the ones that I could put together in my own head at the time I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do some somatic work. I mean, a lot of perfectionists are really constricted, often in their bodies, and so learning how to let go there can be very important too.
Wow. Incredible. Well, thank you for your work. I mean,
Of
to
course.
to to see something and follow that call to get that message out there, make more people aware of it. I mean, I imagine at this point you've positively impacted hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives.
No.
So, congrats
Well,
on
thank you for that.
that.
I
um,
have been contacted with too many people whose sons or daughters or friends or spouses have killed themselves, and the community and the families going, I didn't even know they were depressed. They're just shocked, and that kind of suicide rate is going up. So
mhm.
we really, as a culture, got to be aware of that.
Yeah, is that something that I was just a kind of follow-up question that I thought about as you were talking was this whole kind of shift towards entrepreneurial culture, people
Hmm.
wanting to I guess just be their own boss, create their own thing, be really chase that opportunity for big success, right? That maybe career wouldn't provide. Have you seen an increase in this, not just depression as a whole, but like the hidden kind alongside that? Because I would think that that might be something that, just tied together.
Well,
Probably tough to say because it's
Well,
like,
I'm not a researcher. I'm a
hmm.
clinician. So,
Okay.
I haven't set up a research model that would say, certain, but I know that the researchers have found that perfectionism in general is going up. And there's a woman named I don't know how to say her last name. It's Twenge, Twenge, who's a sociologist that has studied all the different generations since the World War II generation as far as their depression and anxiety and suicidality and all that stuff. She is really concerned, more than concerned, about millennials and even the younger generation from millennials, because as she somewhat sarcastically but tragically says, young people aren't killing each other as much, but they're killing themselves more.
Mm,
So,
that is true.
it's one thing to be
Wow.
your own entrepreneur and not want to work for a company and all that's wonderful. But are you socially connected? Are you having real relationships with people that you can count on? Or are you
Hmm.
sitting in front of your computer screen or your iPad or your phone and you're just spending so much time being isolated that depression would be right around the door. And especially if you run into struggle, you need a support network, a
Mm,
real one, real people who can
yep.
hold your hand, or at least during the pandemic wanted to give you a hug, even though they might not be able to, but they
Yeah.
told you all the time how they wish they would. So in whatever entrepreneurial journey that you take, I think it's important to stay connected to, I know it's important to stay connected to people that care about you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We say that a supportive network is really the foundation for any dream, to achieve any dream. And
Yep.
that includes the personal relationships. And I think, as we just become more evolved as a society, it's really the professional ones too. It's just, who you spend time with and who you
Sure.
surround yourself with. It's just, that's a big part of your environment. Right. So,
Well, I wrote
um,
the acknowledgments in the book. I said, I told everybody that I would try very hard not to talk about writing the book. And I'm sure I absolutely talked a lot about writing the book. And so please forgive me. But my husband was incredibly supportive, my son, my friends. So I couldn't have done it without them because it was hard. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, except give birth. Kind of like giving
wow.
birth, I guess.
Wow. Um, Amazing. I know this kind of I don't know if this, becoming a very successful author and podcast host was part of your dreams at any point, but, you're obviously a big achiever, a very long career, what's your dreams now? I'm curious what's next, what would you like to see? What are we working towards now?
Well, I'm really, I mean, you were kind to say that maybe I've, helped millions of people. I don't think the message has gotten out that well yet. Now, I will tell you that it's been translated into 7 different languages, or at least 3 so far, and we have contracts on 4 more. And I
Mm,
just interviewed a young woman in Poland on Monday, and she told me that the book sold out in 3 days in Poland.
I'm willing to
So,
bet you've hit millions.
and it's in
Books get
Dutch.
lended,
It's in Dutch
they.
and it's in Korean. And in Korea, there was an actual bidding war on the book. They knew that it would be that successful. So it's pretty exciting to see the book being translated into so many different languages. And what I'm trying to do right now is, that I turned the book in 20, uh, early part of 2019, and I couldn't touch it anymore. I've learned a lot in 3 years about it and talking
Hmm.
to more people. So I'm trying to sort of convince my publishing company to let me do a workbook that would actually stand on its own, and more about what else there is to talk about, because I couldn't talk about everything in 200 pages. So
Right.
right now my passion is to deepen the message to people, because I am that passionate about it. And just like everybody else in the world right now, I also I just personally want to travel. And
Mm.
I also want to stay healthy. I That's a I'm 66 years old, so it's you've got some challenges at that age, and I want to stay very vital. And so part of any plan or any dream I have is to pay attention and make sure I'm getting some good self-care, so I
Right.
can have the energy and the strength to do all of this.
Awesome. Well, yes. So if I'm a betting man, if I had to bet, we're definitely over millions of people on this message. And I'm sure that second book is going to make it out. So I wish you the best on that. Before we get out of here, can you just tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find the SelfWork podcast, and where to just read up more, and of course where to buy the book?
Sure. Well, my website's drmargaretrutherford.com, and you can find the podcast there. You can subscribe to the website, and you'll actually receive a weekly newsletter that gives you the weekly blog post and the weekly podcast episode. So that's an easy way. But the podcast is on it's on iHeartRadio, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on every podcast platform there is. Um, the book is at Amazon, both in ebook, audiobook, and paperback. And
Awesome.
it's Barnes and Noble and everywhere else, and indie books. It's certainly there. We want to make sure we use indie books because it's just such a vital part of our community. And if you want to talk with me again, here's my email. It's askdrmargaret at drmargaretrutherford.com, and I read them all. I can't answer them all, but I do read them all.
All right. Amazing. Well, Dr. Margaret, it's been incredible to have this conversation with you. I hope we get to have another one
Sounds
someday
good.
soon. And all right.
And good luck with your dream as well.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much.